last month, I talked about how conservatives were getting talking points from John Ioannidis to bolster their claims that COVID-19 is being overdiagnosed and just really isn't that big of a deal. I didn't go into it very deeply then, but that is kind of a big deal, and here's why. First of all, because it's forced me to finally learn once and for all how to pronounce John Ioannidis' name. Longtime fans of this channel already know that thanks to growing up in an environment that wasn't terribly intellectual, but did provide me with a lot of books, I'm really good at reading things and not really good at pronouncing them. Ioannidis. I basically know Greek now. I'm probably still saying it wrong. Ioannidis. Can't figure out how many syllables Ioannidis. Anyway, second of all, it's a big deal because Ioannidis is a big name, both amongst the smaller sphere of skeptics and in the larger world of science, particularly the study of science itself and epidemiology. He is most well known for his debunking. His biggest studies have been about how fucked up many scientific studies are. He was one of the loudest voices calling attention to how bad the replication crisis is right now throughout many different disciplines, including medicine. Researchers are generally rewarded for publishing novel findings. So often they either consciously or probably more often unconsciously massage their data to find something interesting. They aren't rewarded generally for replicating other studies. So shoddy research often gets published and then taken as truth for far too long. He's also on the record rightly criticizing sloppy meta-analyses. As a reminder, meta-analyses are studies that take a look at all of the previous research on a particular subject, and they combine that previous research into one larger data set to give you an idea of the overall current state of that research. For instance, you could say that one particular study shows that humans are responsible for heating up the planet, but it's much more powerful and much more helpful to say that 97% of all climate research supports the fact that humans are responsible for heating up the planet. One study could be flawed, which is why redundancy and replication is great for our body of scientific knowledge. The problem is that to make a meta-analysis, researchers must pick and choose which studies they're going to include. You could do a meta-analysis, for instance, on whether or not the Earth is flat, and you could only include data from studies performed by Tila Tequila. That's an egregious example, but you can imagine how nefarious and subtle this kind of cherry picking could be. Ioannidis pointed out that scientists with pre-existing agendas can easily manipulate the data to show whatever they want, or whatever their sponsors want, as he pointed out to Retraction Watch, when he said sponsors and other conflicted stakeholders want to exploit them to promote their products, beliefs, and agendas. He's described this misuse of meta-analyses as an epidemic. All of this is true, and particularly ironic because researchers are now pointing out that Ioannidis himself has published a meta-analysis that they say manipulates data to downplay an actual, literal epidemic in order to promote the agenda that we should reopen the U.S. economy at the risk of spreading COVID-19 and killing more people. And his meta-analysis includes his own much pilloried and as of right now still not officially peer-reviewed antibody study claiming to show that coronavirus had infected 85 times more people than we currently know about in Silicon Valley, making it much less deadly than other studies suggest. Thanks to a whistleblower, the public has just learned that that study was funded in part by David Neilman, who's the founder of JetBlue Airways and who is outspoken in his belief that the virus isn't that bad and we should let everyone leave their homes again and start, taking jets to other places. Just a suggestion. It's almost like that's a conflicted sponsor with a predetermined agenda paying for someone to promote their agenda. Almost. Much like his initial study, the meta-analysis has been the subject of some lively criticism over on social media. And honestly, that's the nice thing about these sort of papers being made publicly available, because social media peer review tends to be much more thorough and much more critical than the traditional type, and much more entertaining because we all get to watch. For instance, Australian epidemiologist Gid MK pointed out some of the flaws of the meta-analysis over on Twitter. Ioannidis fails to include cogent information on why he chose the studies he did, and similarly why he chose to exclude others. For instance, no government reports are included in the meta-analysis, which is strange because that's where the bulk of the testing data is coming from. For instance, the largest data set we have to date comes from a Spanish report that estimated an infection fatality rate, IFR, of 1 to 1.3%. Conveniently, none of the studies chosen by Ioannidis have an IFR greater than 0.28%. Gid also points out that several of the studies included in the meta-analysis suffer from a thing called right censoring. In common parlance, right censoring refers to YouTube removing neo-Nazi and Alex Jones videos, but in scientific terms, it means a faulty method of data analysis in which subjects leave a study too early or the study itself ends too early before the desired result could reasonably be expected to be seen. Gid has a good example. Let's say you want to see if smoking is correlated with lung cancer. So you take 1,000 20-year-old smokers and 1,000 20-year-old non-smokers, and you track them for 5 years. By the age of 25, let's say 11 smokers have lung cancer and 10 non-smokers have lung cancer, which is an insignificant difference. If the study ends there, you could say, well, no correlation between smoking and lung cancer. But if you let the study continue for another 25 years, you would see that, in fact, the number of smokers with lung cancer would skyrocket past the non-smokers. Boom, there's your correlation. What's this got to do with COVID-19? Well, if you test a random population for antibodies today and find that 100 people have them, but only one person died today, you might think that that's an IFR of 1%. But COVID-19 doesn't kill people immediately. It can take up to 2-3 weeks to do that. That means that your calculated IFR is going to be much lower than what it actually is. That's right censoring. To figure out the actual IFR, you'd want to test 100 people today and then see how many people are dead in a few weeks. Or you could use statistical modeling to correct for the problem. Several of Ioannidis' studies didn't do that, and he didn't bother to correct it for them. Instead, what he did was he took the lowest possible IFR from each study. For instance, a German study showed an IFR of 0.37 to 0.46%. He decided to choose the 0.37% only. And then he skewed them in the opposite direction, making them much lower than what those studies suggest, and claiming that it was appropriate for him to do that because those studies didn't test for all the various antibodies. So to go back to that German study that found an IFR of 0.37 to 0.46%, that gets marked down as 0.37 and then adjusted to 0.28%. Shady. Like I said in my previous video about Ioannidis' initial seroprevalence study, it is useful to have more information, even if that data wasn't necessarily handled in the correct fashion. And I don't think Ioannidis is an evil person who is trying to get more people killed. So I'm not going to call his studies trash. I'll leave that to the experts to do. And I won't call him trash, but I will point out that he very clearly has a bias. Over on Wired, David H. Friedman points out that when he interviewed Ioannidis back in 2004, the scientist said outright that his own bias is regarding finding that researchers are actually doing good work. He says, if I did a study and the results showed that in fact there wasn't really much bias in research, would I be willing to publish it? That would create a real psychological conflict for me. Ioannidis was acknowledging that he's invested in showing that other scientists tend to get it wrong, and that he might end up being skeptical of data suggesting they are, in fact, getting it right. And I have to say that even though I do think Ioannidis is simply the victim of his own internal biases, and I don't think he's in the pocket of big COVID-19 conspiracy theory, it's extremely shady that he didn't disclose a really obvious conflict of interest, that his research was being funded by a multimillionaire who is on record supporting Donald Trump's plan to reopen the economy because the lives we will lose are worth less than his stock portfolio. I don't think that David Neilman passed Ioannidis a suitcase of money and told him to make up the data, but I can't help but be skeptical when Ioannidis fails to disclose the connection and, when called on it, claims that he didn't know Neilman was behind the money. Neilman himself told BuzzFeed that he specifically gave the $5,000 to Stanford for Ioannidis' study, and added that he was in communication with all of the researchers throughout the duration of the study. He even wrote a post for Ben Shapiro's website, The Daily Wire, in which he said that he got to know all of them, including Ioannidis, personally. I highly recommend you check out the BuzzFeed article, which the reporting they've done has been great. They've uncovered a lot of similar shady business surrounding these studies. And it's so disappointing to see someone I really admired for their unbridled skepticism suddenly descend into anti-science, neoconservative, libertarian buffoonery. But, I mean, I guess I have to say that that feeling is becoming pretty familiar, cozy. Like an old pair of pajama bottoms that you can't wear around other people due to the smell and the holes in delicate places. But it's familiar. I'll conclude by saying what I already said in that previous video. None of this should matter to you, the general public. Whether they find that COVID-19 has an IFR of 0.01 or 0.1 or 1%, none of that has to do with your health right now. None of those figures will apply to you if you catch the virus. Your odds of survival depend on your health and your luck. And your access to medical care, I suppose. So don't leave it up to that. Stay away from people. If you have to go near people, wear a mask, wash your hands, take care of yourself.